Hello, everyone. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to speak with you all. It's really great to be here, and I've been in Japan for a few days. It's a great opportunity to come and visit here, and I've been learning so much and expanding my thinking already and having lots of intercultural experiences. So I'm already really enjoying my time, and I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of you and learning more about your work as well. So I want to begin, I want to extend a practice that we have in Australia where I'm a white settler. And this practice recognises the ongoing role of colonisation in Australian life, in everyday Australian life, and the role of colonisation, especially on Indigenous Australian people. And at RMIT University, where I work and where I think and where I live, we're on the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people who've cared for country there for many, many generations. And so acknowledging this is a really important way to remember how the past is alive in the present, as well as to highlight the politics that are always part of the work that I do, that we do. Um, and yeah. And so, oh, there we go. So Amber and Quamelina's words here with me as I go about my work, my research. I'm an ethnographer, so I'm often in the water. So her words are very important to me. But so is Lisa Slater's question here, which is how can settlers like her and like me, how can we stay well on stolen land? Slater's question recognizes that my presence as a settler isn't going to change anytime soon. So, with that being the case, what can we do to minimize further harm? Slater's question is really helpful to stay engaged with colonial politics in my own research about sport and physical activities in Australia. But I've also extended Slater's question to include staying well as one species of many on this planet, which isn't separate to thinking about colonisation. And while this is a time that we might refer to often as the Anthropocene, other writers remind us of the injustices that are at the core of climate change. So instead, they call it the Capitalocene. This word reflects the role of ideologies of markets, growth, and competition. And climate change is an effect of the ideologies of human exceptionalism over non humans that drive colonization and imperialism. The willingness to extract, to consume, to dump things, render beings extinct is all tied to a sense of the right to do so. Philippe Pignarre and Isabel Stengers describe this as a form of capitalist sorcery. Magic spells spun to turn all things, people, minerals, animals, and water, into resources for our benefit. Capitalist sorcery makes us complicit in destroying lives and environments. And so they're so effective that we don't even notice them anymore, even going so far as to conflate them with practices of morality, of aesthetics, and our own exceptionalism as a species. The magic of the spells is beguiling, and that's what makes them difficult to break free from. In forthcoming work, Lisa Slater again, she discusses colonial infrastructures of the heart. And she uses the example of the naturalization of the human nature binary of human exceptionalism over the natural world as a key example. As with capitalist sorcery, Slater writes that infrastructures of the heart are a ruse, a colonial con job that enables settlers to resubstitute and sustain Western ontologies and to marginalize other ways of knowing. But she also writes that experience has taught me that disturbing taken for granted perceptions is fundamental to becoming more alive to other ways of knowing. These disruptions are not necessary for everyone, and many of you in this room embody worldviews that already resist the sorceries I'm talking about. But people like we need disruption. And so we come to outdoor swimming. Little journey there to it. So we come to outdoor swimming and how it can be a counterspell to these sorceries and con jobs. My research is about recreational ocean sports and leisure practices and cultures. I started my work with a focus on gender politics as surfing, but for the best part of the last decade, I've been focused on how participation in ocean swimming, in particular, but also surfing and a little bit sailing, how they can shape our relationships to coasts and oceans, and how these activities can activate a sense of responsibility for the care of these places. For a lot of people, swimming and surfing in oceans, as well as in rivers and streams and reservoirs and canals, it's part of their everyday life. So it means they spend a lot of very intimate time in the water. As Astrida Nemanis writes, intimacy is not mastery. And so everyday activities like swimming can be counterspells to ideological sorcery and infrastructures of the heart by helping us feel the effects of our actions in the water while working against our worldviews and our established worldviews and relationships. This is possible in all kinds of activities: walking, hiking, mountain biking, skiing, and paddling. But for me, it's been swimming and surfing that's had this effect. So swimming's much more than a sport. It's a way of being in water, of connecting, collecting food, traveling, putting ourselves out of our depth. When we're immersed in the ocean, we're out of our usual land-based element, which, as Kate Moles says here, entangles us and makes us vulnerable as part of multi-species, non-human ecologies. This includes animals, plants, weather, and the climate, but it also includes technologies, histories, spirits, ancestors, economies, and pollution. On land, I find it easy to forget the effects of how I'm part of an ecology. I breathe, I belong, and unless there's an earthquake, as here in Japan, the land stays in place under my feet. I'm lucky where I live. When I think of myself in the ocean, my otherness and out of placeness is always apparent. I'm floating, I'm out of my depth, I'm kicking my legs, keeping my head above water to breathe, and wondering what else is swimming with me. Swimming doesn't look the same for everyone. For me, it's swimming about a kilometre or so freestyle across the bay where I grew up with my friends. But for the armour divers here in Japan, it's a form of free diving to collect food, abalone, urchins, seaweed. Kumikato describes how these women, armour divers, learn to hear sounds underwater, clicks and pops. They understand what to listen for as well as what to see. For urban swimmers, like on this hot summer day in Stone Town in Zanzibar, it's a form of spontaneous play. It's an interaction with people, with water and waves, with fans, friends and family, with tourists, with the stone walls, with boats, with sand, and with the incoming tide. Or here in Bondi, it might be an ocean pool that only goes so far in holding back the conditions of the sea. This pool was recently damaged in huge surf. It bent the metal poles, it smashed the windows of the building behind. I was once swimming this pool and watched someone washed out onto the pool deck by an incoming wave, smaller than that. The pool was, and further up the coast in Newcastle, the Merriweather pool has just been closed, I saw, because sea hares have gone into the pool. And so they've rejected, it's very popular, full of people every day, but they've told the swimmers to stay out to look after the sea hares, these creatures, so they can be safe from people. But in all cases, oh, sorry. But in all cases, what characterizes ocean swimming for swimmers are the encounters that we have and over which we have no control. Of course, there's the critters, the fish and the birds, the seaweed and jellyfish and dolphins, and all the many other living beings who delight us. But there's also pollution, chemicals, plastic, oils, storm debris, all of which we absorb into our bodies while we're swimming, just as we excrete them in return. There's also the encounters with histories and infrastructures, literal and metaphorical, some of which I've already mentioned. But there's technologies like drones and boats. There's the various policies that shape swimming in public. We swim with violence, death, and love. We swim with cables and rules. We swim with ancestors, even when we don't know it. All of these encounters can make us feel vulnerable. But there are some critters who make vulnerability feel much more immediately consequential. In many places, ocean users regularly encounter sharks. Around my area, that's the case. And we do so even without knowing it. As a critter on the surface, we can become prey. Death by shark bite or attack is unlikely. But in Australia, a few people are killed every year, and it's very traumatic for the communities. In some places I've swum, toxic jellyfish cause very painful injuries, something I've learned the hard way. In forests and rivers and on mountains, hikers and fishers have similar experiences with animals like coyotes, bears, and wolves. And even wasps and mosquitoes can remind us we're part of a food chain. In the Iberian Peninsula, orcas have been attacking the rudders of yachts and in some cases causing these yachts to sink. There's no record of an orca killing a human outside of where they're entrapped in an ocean pool. But from play to revenge, there are various theories as to why this pot of orcas have it in for yachts. Of course, the vulnerability swimmers and surfers and sailors feel doesn't always disrupt their beliefs in the direction that I'm suggesting it's able to. Those people are used to being safe and having their security ensured. They live together, they live in very safe places outside of war zones where they feel secure, and where they feel secure on the street, they want to feel safe in the ocean as well. They feel like they have a right to that. So they install nets, they initiate culls, or they take matters into their own hands. They kill the animals that they don't want to be vulnerable to. But at the same time, they'll fight for cleaner rivers, marine reserves, and less development, or to stop seabed mining. Things are rarely straightforward when it comes to people. So I came to this work and this thinking through feeling my own vulnerability in my fieldwork when I was swimming with friends across the bay in my hometown. This is not that bay, this is Bondi, but this is similar to how it felt. It was a warm summer day, and it's not a very dangerous swim, but we do share the water with waves and boats and sharks, and the water is quite deep where I was. So I was already halfway across the bay when I felt very suddenly how, if anything happened to me, if a shark did bite me, if a boat did hit me, or if I started drowning, no one was going to get to me in time. I'd die. Seeing how far that it was as far to go to the other side as it was to go back. So I realized I had to just keep swimming. At that time, I was reading Val Plumwood's work about being attacked and nearly killed by a crocodile. That happened to her in the 1980s. For Plumwood, the attack shattered the illusion of human superiority and it changed her worldview and her relationship to the world. My much less dramatic experience had a similar effect on me. But that day, I realized that my fear of the ocean was not as strong as my willingness to be a part of it. Everyday activities like ocean swimming are the kinds of practices that can challenge the embodiment of human exceptionalism by, in Rose's words, resituating humans in ecological terms at the same time as it resituates non-humans in ethical and cultural terms. It recognizes that they have their own lives and ways of being in the world that have nothing to do with us. This thinking challenges the ideology of human supremacy over nature that has, as Plumwood writes, been functional for Western culture in enabling it to exploit nature with less constraint. But it also creates illusions by denying embeddedness in and dependency on nature. It has allowed a justification of all kinds of extracting and polluting practices, of ensuring oceans are safe for people's leisure by enacting shark bite mitigation strategies such as nets and culls, support for projects toward the colonization of Mars, of Earth's moon, and of the night sky by satellites, of exploitation of people to access the minerals in their lands, of exporting unwanted electronics and textiles to countries such as Ghana, as though the objects in their burdensome decay never existed for the original owners at all. In practice, many people continue to live as though we will have security from the environmental and social devastation of climate change, or at least security for those who can afford it. As Ariel Saleh reminds us, a light green middle class can coexist quite comfortably with capitalist despoilation of the world because it can afford to eat organically grown food and buy houses in unpolluted places. Disrupting the comfort so many of us feel in our everyday lives is in a way that challenges how we relate to the non-human world is much easier in theory than it is in practice. But we need to stop and find more ways to live together well on this planet. And certainly there are plenty of examples of where this is happening. Groups like the Surfrider Foundation and Surfers Against Sewage have been running for decades, with organisations like Surfers for Climate, Divers for Climate, and Swimmable Cities emerging in more recently. All of these organisations are active from grassroots community levels through to lobbying government officials, and many of them also work with First Peoples. Yolanda Waters from Divers for Climate has been particularly committed to promoting the work of ocean conservationists from diverse cultural and ethnic backgrounds, as well as promoting the work of young people. These groups have rallied thousands of people for protests, for workshops, information sessions, petitions, for fundraising, and for actions for change in their lives and in their policy. And their momentum only seems to be growing. Last night in bed, very late, I was on WhatsApp chatting away with my friend Kate Moles, who I quoted earlier. And we were talking about how swimming, it's not the answer to the capitalist sorcery that I started this talk with, because the problem itself, as we talked about earlier, it's not purely an individual one. But changing the minds and beliefs of people who consume the most materials, resources, and capital is essential for change. So swimming isn't the answer, but it certainly helps us think through the question of how to stay well on the planet. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Dr. Olive? Any questions? It's a conference. I know it's the morning. There's one right at the back. Please wait for the microphone. That's so you can be heard online as well.
Thank you. That was very inspiring and interesting. I'm wondering about, I'm interested in popular culture, and I noticed you're talking about sharks. And I thought it was very interesting that you framed that as the sort of the encounter with sharks in a non-fearful way. As an American, I'm steeped in fear of shark in the media, news. It all started, of course, with Jaws in 1977, I think it was. Um, I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but I'm just wondering if you feel like we need to start countering some of those images that come through popular culture in fiction, but also in the nonfiction media news.
It's a very good question, and I've been doing some work on that based on that drone footage that I shared with you. Sharks are terrifying because they can kill us, and they remind us that we're not top of the food chain. When we're in the ocean, we're part of that food chain in a way that feels horrifying. And I'm afraid I don't want to get bitten or attacked by a shark. That's for sure. And I know that for people who've had that experience, it can really change their relationship to the ocean. But what that kind of drone footage has, and as you say, a lot of the representation has been what gets called a lot the Jaws effect, which is that the shark is only a predator. It's a serial killer, a monster. Humans are a target species for them. And that's not true. They're a creature. They're just eating um, the way that we kill animals to eat as well. So many of us kill animals to eat as well. But the drone footage that I was showing you has been really interesting because what I'm hearing in a lot of these communities, especially amongst swimmers, bit more than surfers, is that it's showing them examples of how they have encounters with sharks regularly in a way that they don't even notice, and that they don't get bitten, they don't even know. The shark's just a curious being who is coming and checking out their feet. So when I've been swimming, and you can when you're swimming, because you've seen so many of this footage of shark attacks from the point of view of the swimmer, this creature coming out of the depths. That's how it gets in your head when you're in the water and you start to see these phantom shadows and things in the water and these it sits in your guts quite strongly. And sometimes I've had to go in because I am so afraid. But actually seeing that footage of these alternative representations of sharks has made me feel differently because I know that actually I'm not going to see the shark that I've been in encounter with. So while I know I've never seen a big shark when I've been in the water, I've no doubt that I've been in encounter with one. Yeah, and I'm hearing that across like a lot of the people that I talk to. And it's a pretty contentious topic, and I don't mean to dismiss the trauma that many people go through in these communities where there have been multiple deaths by shark attack and shark bite, and it is awful for them. But they're not serial killers and monsters. I hope that answers your question.
Kia ora, I'm Peggy Barrows and I'm all the way from New Zealand.
ora.
I just loved your research and I loved your presentation. Thank you.
Oh,
My question really is, what was your greatest learning from this piece of research and how did it change you?
it's completely changed the way I exist in the world, and I think it will continue to have impacts. I think one of the great privileges of being able to spend time with ideas and experiences as a researcher, in my case, literally immersed in the topic that I'm working on, but talking to lots of different people and expanding my reading significantly to take in, lots of different people's work. It's shifted how I think about my rights. And I mean that both from that tension between how we live on the planet as a human in a multi-species world, but also in the settler kind of worldview that shaped how I expected to feel safe in places. So that really profound experience of feeling my vulnerability in that way. And I grew up on a beach, so I don't know why it happened all of a sudden to me in my 40s. It really shifted those expectations that I have for my place in the world, and it's impacted my behavior in a lot of ways. I don't know how to be more specific than that without being very personal, which I'm not quite willing to do. I'm sorry. But yeah, it's been very big, clearly, because I'm having trouble finding my words to explain it.
Thank you so much for your presentation. As someone whose research also looks at kind of everyday practice, especially from a lens of Indigenous, Black and Asian voices, I was just wondering, how do you find, when you look at something like whether it's swimming or just being in water as, positioned in your research as, say, a method or framing your methodology, what do you find the most effective way to kind of record and voice that, whether that's through kind of writing or speaking about it as you have, or if you use any kind of visual means of doing so? I was just interested in that. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I love talking about method. Yeah, so I'm a pretty analog person. So yeah, I take a lot of field notes and I write and I write and I write and I write and I write. At the end of the day, at the time, I'm always open that I'm not a covert researcher. So I'm always telling people I'm a researcher and allowing them to speak back or not. I'm always clear before I join a group why I'm there. I use my iPhone to take a lot of notes at the time, little memory joggers. And then I write very thick descriptive notes about the experience, but my work's feminist, so I'm very reflexive as well. So I use a technique of writing through myself, which I learned from Elspeth Probyn's work. So I think of my body as I think about how I felt, like what did it feel like? So I try and write my field notes from my body, not my brain in a way, which sounds maybe, I don't know, a bit strange. I take a lot of photos, so unless I credited them, the photos were mine. And I'm trying to, with those photos, not just create a description. I'm trying to, again, evoke a feeling of what does it look like to be in the water? And I hope those images helped convey what it is like there and how small these little bodies are just floating around in the water in these big spaces, and also how meaningful it is to them. So field notes, on my field notes, sometimes handwritten, my iPhone to take notes, and the photos. I also made a few artworks with using lino print, and I work with an artist, Fiona Hillary, in the School of Art at RMIT. She's a posthuman public artist, and she helps me make videos out of my work, and we collaborate on some things as well. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much for the very interesting study. I think you mentioned technologies and connecting with technologies through swimming. And I think I'm wondering whether you use self-tracking technologies and whether that might, if anything, have any impact on embodiment and vulnerabilities.
That's such a good question. I don't do that. I don't know why. I don't like those technologies. Personally make me want to be faster or something. So I don't like the effect they have on me. But Ronan Foley is a geographer, and he writes about using tracking technologies in part through the videos that people record with GoPros. You can put it in a program that I forget the name of, but I can direct you to his work. And it shows where people move. And because he's videoing at the time, he can map, he's a geographer, what they're talking about alongside the places that they're going. Surfers do use tracking technologies a lot and they like to see how many waves they caught and how far they've paddled. And they'll often share those maps as well. And they are quite interesting. And swimmers use them sometimes. And I'm seeing that increasingly. But yeah, I've seen, Ronan's work, I think, has been really helpful for me in thinking about the possibility of those tracking technologies for sure. And he also just wrote about traces. So I think he's starting to draw some of that mapping, the technology mapping work into thinking more theoretically as well.
Can I ask you to stand up as well and tell us where you're from when you ask questions, please?
There you go. Hi. Should I go? Hi, I'm Audrey from Finland and also from Canada. Thank you very much for your presentation. I connected specifically with this idea of coloniality and being settler in the world and the Anthropocene. And I understand that the immersion into water is a really strong way for you to feel immersed and changing your perspective. From my own perspective, I don't communicate with water so often. So I understand that your studies about water and involvement with water, but have you come across different studies that would show a similar kind of embodiment or immersion in embodiment without being in water specifically for people like me that may not have this relationship to water?
Yeah,
That's a difficult question.
Yeah, in research from outdoor education, there's a lot of work about the effects of the time we spend in different outdoor spaces. So outdoor education is a field that talks a lot about the pedagogies of place. So they're thinking a lot about that. This is so sorry to talk about my work again, but it was funny. I spent a lot of time in forests in Aotearoa, in France, in Australia, especially during the pandemic in Australia, when I spent a lot of time under trees because I couldn't get to the water. And I realized actually it's the same, that being under trees is an immersion, and that seeing the birds go through the leaves is just like looking up instead of down. And so there was a time when I found I didn't want to look across the ocean anymore because it felt too vast. And I sought that embrace of forests and those encounters that I was having with the cool air, with the birds. And it felt the same. And so it's an important point to make, that immersion is not only in water. It's certainly a word we use to describe that the most, but we can be immersed in an ecology in all kinds of contexts. So yeah, outdoor education and the work on nature-based sports, that's outdoor education is very established in Barbara Humberston's work and Mike Brown's work. It's really great. And nature-based sports work is certainly growing at the moment in interest. Yeah, I hope that gives you some direction.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand as well. My name's Curtis. First and foremost, thank you for your kōrero and speaking to a lot of the traumas that are affecting our Dreamtime peoples, our brothers and sisters of Australia. Thank you for sharing that, because that's a lot of the trauma that still affects us as Māori Indigenous people of Aotearoa. So thank you for that. My question was just in relation to connection. So for an individual, what do you think is, I suppose, the first step for relearning and reconnecting back to nature? back to the moana, back to the ocean, back to the land, back to the sky? What do you think's an important first step?
Thank you so so much for your question. I do think it's about spending time and developing those intimacies and being willing to be in encounter in ways that make us uncomfortable. There's a very big interest at the moment in cold water swimming. And I think there's an interest in discomfort because so often in our lives, we're very comfortable. So that moment when you go and you're willing to be uncomfortable in a space, it makes you, I have found, you have to think differently about, you have to be more attentive to where you are. In very cold water, that's for safety reasons. But in my case, swimming in the ocean, I have to be attentive to what's going on around me at all times. I have to understand, I have to look at the weather to think about what conditions a wave might hold me down. I've had that experience many times. There might be schools of fish going past. These are things which bring sharks in. I saw recently there was a dead whale further down the beach, which would also bring more sharks in. So it's a time not to swim. I lived for a while in Aotearoa, and while I was there, I was living in Raglan. A person drowned, and I saw the people from the iwi, some Maori people there, had posted, they requested people don't swim. That was a tapu on swimming. And I could have ignored that and gone surfing anyway, but I didn't. I understood that there was something else going on about those relationships to water and those intimacies at that time that were about practices of care for the place. We shouldn't be collecting food or spending time in water where there's been a body passed, but also to respect the other knowledges that help shape those intimacies. So for me, that's spending time and really being there and attending to the place, which can happen in all sorts of ways, even through, we think Instagram takes us out of place, but for a lot of people, it helps them really focus in on things. I'm not advocating for social media as a solution, but it can help us attend. So I think it's that willingness to attend and take time to look and learn how to understand a place. Like the armor divers with the sound, I don't really understand that yet because I don't free dive. I'm a bit frightened of being underwater. I'm a very surface dweller, me. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question a bit, but it is that willingness to spend time. Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Wendell Norkia, University of the Western Cape, with Sebo Mokopela, also from the University of the Western Cape, in a beautiful city of Cape Town. I just want to also think about what you said about being under a tree. I also share that sentiment. For me, also, what's different when I'm in deep water, when I'm just sitting on my back and enjoying the waves, is vulnerability. So if you do get something happens to you, you will sink. Whereas under the tree, there's no the vulnerability, something can fall on your head, I guess. But you're more vulnerable, and I actually enjoy that. You're serious when you're in the water. You really feel that, and you can anytime anything can happen, of course. To you, you've explained that to us, and it's wonderful. I just want to ask you, maybe just a comment, if you have any, about pollution at beaches. We've had that a lot in Cape Town especially over this December season when of course it's summer and we do have a lot of people swimming, but that has been an issue for us, especially at some beaches. We do have a lot of blue flag beaches, which are very premium beaches, of course, in Cape Town. But just a comment on that if you have any. Thank you.
I have many comments on that. Yeah, we've treated the ocean like a dump for a really long time. We've treated it like a place that makes things disappear. We just put things in it and then look away. Sometimes we take things out of it too, but mostly we chuck something in it and we think it goes away, but we forget that it all comes back to shore anyway. And most of us, when we spend time in the ocean, it is on the shore. It is quite coastal. It's not out deep. It's a sailing kind of thing. Yeah, so the pollution question, I've been very interested in some of the questions, like more subtle questions about pollution. So there's the plastic pollution's the obvious one. We start with microplastics. Microplastics are especially terrible because plastics absorb the chemicals that they're immersed in. And so the smaller they get, the older they are, the more toxic they are. So they're very problematic. One of the pollutants I'm interested in, though, I was thinking as well of the LA fires as well, and how the beaches there are still so affected by the land-based fires, and all the ash and things that have blown into the sea there. It's just washing up black debris on the beaches, and the water's very polluted. After rain on the Gold Coast in Australia, which has very clean water, the airport, which uses firefighting chemicals all the time, including PFAS, washes into the sea. And so you can't see that, but the surfers are then surfing with those chemicals. But of course, we also, when we swim, excrete. So we pee in the water. Well, I do anyway, when I'm in the water. And so any of the kind of hormones or antihistamines or so on, also go into the water through my body, out of my body when I'm in there. But at the same time, just as the microplastics do, so do we absorb those chemicals in return. So when we do it in the air, I think, of course, as well, air pollution affects us in the same way. We breathe it in, it hits our skin. But in the water, we absorb it in a way that's very intimate. It goes in our mouth, in our eyes, in our ears, in the orifices. And so you have to accept that you're going to be what the water is when you're in the water. It's again, that intimacy, I think, of the water. On your tongue, you can taste it, or it stings your eyes, or it makes your skin itch as well. It stays with you. And I think that's something that then is having these effects with this activism, especially groups like Surfers Against Sewage, who are really fighting the sewage outfalls in the UK, because the water's treated very badly in the UK by Thames Water. Because they want to swim in it, but they also know to swim in it is to become the problem. So the pollution is very important, I think, just as the sharks, for example, and the orcas and the jellyfish highlight our vulnerability and the depth highlights our smallness. The pollution, to me, highlights that we have to live with this problem, that it is not separate to our bodies. So to go in, if we want to swim in water, we have to take care of it, because we're just absorbing the problem in return. And if we're absorbing it, so is every other living thing in that water. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the presentation. You are a participant researcher in this work, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So can you give me a clarification of how did you arrive with or what are the basis of your analysis? Is it your personal reflections, or do you have scripts going into your conclusions?
Oh,
Thank you.
wow. Really getting into the sausage being made, aren't we? That's a very good question. So my work is feminist. I also draw on queer theory and decolonial theory as well, anti-colonial theory and posthuman theory, ecofeminism. And so when I go into this work, I already have questions of power that really drive it. So questions of power, I'm always looking at questions of gender, questions of colonialism, and increasingly questions of human, non-human interactions. And how does power operate through these forms of power operate through the encounters that swimmers are having, and how do they make sense of that back on shore? So that's really what I'm looking for. And I use a framework always that's how is power operating? So, and then how are people experiencing that? And how are they talking about it? So in a way, I think about it as power, ethics, and pedagogy. They're the three kind of analytical frameworks that I always use to understand things. So I never just look at one, it's then also what's the consequences each time of how that happens. When I use field notes, so a lot of it's very embodied, but I also have notes to look at. I use interviews. So when I look through, I do thematic analysis, I suppose. And I also look a lot at social media content to understand the representation of that to other places, to other groups and other people, because sometimes the way people represent on social media alone doesn't reflect the experiences in the water. And that's what I found in the work about women's surfing. That's what I learned there, was what surf magazines were saying about surf culture and women, which was sexist and misogynist. There's no other way to put it. It was violent against women in those magazines. That was not actually how people were treated in the water all the time. Things were much more subtle. So looking at those multiple points, for me, experience, the interviews, and then the representations is really helpful for understanding a broader picture. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Anishinaabe from Canada. My question is, you've talked about colonialism and decolonization. What Indigenous scholars have you used in your work that could help like the room kind of center it a bit more into like the Indigenous knowledge that either exists in Australia or anywhere that is around the waterways? Okay.
Yeah. In particular, I've been focusing on Indigenous Australian women. And so I've been using a lot Eileen Morton Robinson's work on the white possessive. Her book, that's one of her books, and Talking Up to the White Woman is really important as well, especially as a feminist text. Amber and Quay Molina's work, a lot of critiques of ecofeminism, as well as some beautiful, she's got a beautiful book that initial quote's taken on from called Living on Stolen Land. It's a poem, the book. It's very beautiful. Lauren Tynan's work as well about relationality. She's a Palawa woman from Lutruwita, Tasmania, has been really helpful. And then further afield, like many people, I've been reading Robin Wall Kimmerer's incredibly, it's almost overly generous work, I think. And in Aotearoa, of course, Linda Tuai Smith has been really important methodologically. I hope that's helpful.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm Rosal from the Philippines. My question is, what can you say about the use of waters for capitalist intentions like tourism? Does that further our relationship with waters, or does that hurt the indigenous?
Yeah, there's a lot of work at the moment on regenerative tourism, which I'm not super familiar with. Loretta Bellato has just done some work on that in Melbourne about regenerative tourism and swimming in the Birrarung River there. So that might be helpful to look at. One of the questions, I mean, people like to visit the ocean because it makes them feel good. It makes us feel so good, even just being near it. Not everyone wants to swim because the ocean's also terrifying. So I understand that. But even just visiting the ocean makes us feel quite good. It's quantifiably good for our health to be there. And in part, that might be physiological, but it changes our perspective. We look into the distance, you know. But of course, if we only take health from it, if we only take pleasure and leisure and experiences, then that's extractive. And so that's the message that I've been trying to work with when I talk to swimmers about this, that you can't only take from it, you also have to think about how this needs to be reciprocal. How can we care in return? That's very hard for tourism when some people are repeat tourists to places over time and they do develop these intimacies with a place. But yeah, it is hard with tourism when they're on their holiday and they're trying to escape. One of my postgraduate students, Thorcha Hurst, is working on this at the moment. The kind of those tensions in the idea of escape when we go in sailing in her case, but tourism's the same. So I'm not sure how we challenge that with tourism, because it by consequence it's an industry, so it is very extractive. But yeah, I think it's a very good question. I'm sorry that I don't have a more fulfilling answer for you.